It started as a rainy Tuesday afternoon, one of those gray, quiet days when time feels like it slows down. I had just turned 42 a few weeks prior, and while I didn't feel old, I couldn't deny that life had grown repetitive. The house was silent, the kind of silence that settles when you live alone. My divorce had been finalized almost 2 years ago, and though I'd filled the time with work, gardening, and the occasional girls' night, there was still a hollow part of me that missed being seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. My name is Melissa, and this is my story. That particular day, I was caught off guard when I heard a knock at the back patio door. I peeked through the blinds and saw Noah, our old neighbor's son. He was standing there, drenched in rain, holding a box. I hadn't seen him in months, not since his parents moved away and he stayed behind for college. He had always been a sweet kid, a little quiet, respectful, and polite in that way that makes parents say. He was raised right. I opened the door and gestured him in. "Noah, what are you doing out in this rain?" He smiled sheepishly. "Hi, Miss Melissa. I was just dropping this off. I found some of your books in the garage. Stuff my mom must have packed by mistake when we moved." I blinked, touched that he'd taken the time. "You didn't have to come out in this weather. Come in, let me make you some tea or coffee. You're soaked." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that. Thanks." We settled into the kitchen, the kettle humming in the background while he told me about school. He was in his junior year, studying architecture. His voice had changed since I last saw him. It was deeper, steadier, and though he still had that boyish grin, there was something different about him, something more confident. I found myself watching him longer than I should have, admiring the way his dark hair clung to his forehead, how his jawline had sharpened. He wasn't a boy anymore, not really. He was a man. And I didn't want to admit how that made me feel. After a few minutes, the tea was ready. We talked and laughed like old friends, and the rain continued to pour outside, making the world feel closed off and still. He told me he'd been going through a rough patch lately, some stress with finals, a breakup, and missing home. Without thinking, I reached across the table and touched his hand. It was warm and solid, and the moment lingered just a little too long. "I'm really glad you stopped by," I said quietly. "It's been lonely around here." His eyes met mine, and something flickered there. It wasn't lust, not in the obvious way. It was understanding, empathy, and maybe even a little desire. I felt a knot form in my chest, and I stood quickly, grabbing our empty mugs and walking them to the sink, hoping the moment would pass. But it didn't. I felt his presence behind me before he even moved. "Melissa," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "Do you ever wish things were different?" I turned around slowly, drying my hands on a towel. "Different how?" He stepped closer, and the air between us shifted. "That you weren't alone. That someone noticed how beautiful you are. That someone saw you." My breath caught. I should have stopped him, should have laughed it off, reminded him of the age difference, the history, the line we weren't supposed to cross. But I didn't. Because in that moment, all I felt was the truth in his words. I didn't want to be seen. I did want to be touched. And I wanted it to be by someone who looked at me the way Noah was looking at me now. He was only 21. That was the part one kept turning over in my mind. But he wasn't a child. He was kind and mature and respectful. And when he lifted his hand and brushed my cheek with the backs of his fingers, I leaned into it. I closed my eyes. His lips brushed mine gently, unsure, waiting for permission. And I gave it. I kissed him back, letting the tension melt away. It wasn't wild or reckless. It was slow, thoughtful, almost reverent. We pulled apart, and I searched his face, looking for regret. There was none. "I shouldn't be doing this," I whispered. "But you are," he replied, and his hand found mine again. "And I want to be here, with you." The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. We didn't rush. We just stayed close, on the couch, hands brushing, talking in whispers as though the rain might hear us and tell the world. We didn't need to say what was happening between us because we both felt it. It was real. It was unexpected. And it was impossible to ignore. That night, after he left, I sat in my room for a long time. The guilt crept in, then retreated. I kept asking myself if it was wrong. But what we shared wasn't about power or confusion or taking advantage. It was about connection, about being human in a moment when both of us needed something real. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Over the next few weeks, Noah began stopping by more often. Sometimes with groceries or just to help fix something around the house. Each time, the moments grew longer, more intense. We laughed more, talked deeper, and sometimes, when the mood felt right, he'd kiss me again. It was always gentle, always with care. He never pushed. He never demanded. It was all mutual. One evening, we sat on the back porch, sipping wine while the sun dipped below the trees. He looked at me and said, "You know I don't care what people think, right? I like being around you. You make me feel like I matter." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them.
You do matter, Noah.
You matter more than you know. We didn't make any declarations or promises. We didn't need labels. What we had was quiet, tender, and private. But it was also honest. I never pretended it would be forever. Life rarely works like that. He was still figuring out who he was, and I had already learned who I was. But in that intersection of age and emotion, something beautiful was growing. It wasn't always easy. There were nights I questioned myself. I wondered if I was clinging to something that would fade. I worried that I'd wake up and feel ashamed. But I didn't. Because when he held me, I felt safe. When he smiled at me, I felt young again. Not in a foolish way, but in a way that reminded me I was still capable of love and being loved. One Saturday, we were in the kitchen cooking dinner together. He was standing behind me, arms around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. He murmured, "I wish I could freeze this moment." I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of basil and garlic, and whispered, "So, do I." And maybe that's what life is, just a collection of moments. Some of them are messy, some are unexpected, and some are so intimate and kind that they make the hard times worth surviving. Noah wasn't my future, but he reminded me that I still had a heart, that I was still a woman deserving of affection and care. He gave me a season of warmth in a time of emotional winter, and for that I will always be grateful. To anyone who's ever felt invisible, who's ever questioned their worth after heartbreak or age or loneliness, I want you to know, it's okay to want to feel again. It's okay to let someone in, even if the world wouldn't understand it. Love isn't always loud or traditional. Sometimes, it's quiet and tender and found in the most unexpected places. That was my truth. And I'll never regret letting him see me.